Well, good morning, or morning, geez, let's start that again. Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone on here. I know people, come on and off as the webinars go on, and we got the webinar being recorded. So we're going to make sure that we get these things sent out to everyone as well. So if you've been listening for the past several Tuesdays, we're kind of building our pool of webinars, and we're going to post it. So we're actually working on getting some different accounts so we can send out links and get all that stuff to you guys. It's awesome that you guys are participating. Is great for us. So we're doing this every Tuesday. I think we're going to keep doing it. So the next one on deck, I believe, is Dr. Trinka. So Terry Trinka is an eye doctor that is just brilliant. Knows a lot of functional medicine, knows neurology, knows about prisms. He's going to do a topic on migraines and vision. So I would definitely stay tuned for that. So I'll probably mention it again at the end of it. But I'm glad that you guys are here. And we're going to talk about ADD and ADHD. So if you guys have questions, you can definitely post them and I'll try to answer them as we go along. So natural care for ADD and ADHD. It's a topic that definitely wanted to chat on because I think when there's different times of the year when parents have a better availability to bring kids in, for care. I know there's actually a lot of adults that suffer with ADD, ADHD as well. So I'll talk about that a little bit. But thought this would be kind of a great topic to talk about because I think as a lot of kids are home, there's some things that maybe the parents can work on. So I can give you some of those thoughts as we go along. So I'll try to do that towards the end and give you some different thoughts, things that you can try, things you can do, and hopefully we can make a difference. So here we go. Natural ADD or natural care for ADD, ADHD. Gotta switch my slides. There we go. All right, so a little bit about me if you're not familiar. So board certified chiropractic neurologist, board certified chiropractic nutritionist. So in our clinic and what I've really tried to create over the years is that combination of functional medicine and functional neurology. So we try to have that lens with everybody that we're evaluating because everybody has this uniqueness of how things impact the brain and then how the brain can impact the body. And actually with ADD, this is a classic case where you have to look at both the brain and the body together. So I think there's definitely some groups that focus solely on brain function and can get a lot of people better, but I think there's some of those people that get missed because you're not looking at some of the other factors metabolically. So that's what we're going to talk about during the session. So certified nutrition specialist and in practice for 17 years, so you definitely seen a lot and learn a lot over those years. I put on here Brain Health Magazine. If you're not familiar with this, we're definitely sponsored clinic with the Brain Health Magazine put on by Amy Zellmer. So there's a new edition that's going to be coming out on mental health. So if you guys are definitely interested in that, check it out. You can find the Brain Health Magazine. Definitely articles coming out by all the practitioners in my office and other practitioners, and definitely trying to get other people that are in different areas of their specialty that focus on brain health. So you're going to see a lot of really cool stuff coming out, but I wanted to share that with you guys. If you're not, if you're interested, and there's a digital copy, there's the paperback as well. All right, so we're going to talk about ADD. So from an introduction standpoint, man, this is a big topic, and I think sometimes I put out an article and then I do a webinar based on that article, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was a big topic. So I'm going to try, like most of these topics, I'll try to condense it down. And I think one of the things that we try to do is we try to help a lot of the kids and parents that are struggling, even some of the adults that have it, but that's kind of the goal. So I'm going to try to give you as much as I can. I'm going to try to condense it down because this is, honest to goodness, a big topic. So one of my mentors, Rob Malillo, he's actually the founder of Brain Balance Centers that you'll find all over the country. He's also written the book Disconnected Kids, Reconnected Kids. He's a person I've learned a lot from over the years. I've taken courses. So even the courses that I've taken, these have been, oh my gosh, weekend courses, 25 hours, 30-hour courses. so probably a good 150 to 200 hours of just teaching that I've learned from him. So you're trying to take some of this information and clinical experience and say, hey, let's do this in about 30 to 40 minutes. So it's a little bit crazy, but I'll try to do, it's kind of a nice understanding of like how ADD works and ADHD, different parts of the brain. Talk about some of the things that you guys can try, look into, and if you need some more help, we're definitely here to help you guys and be, maybe your coach, practitioner, doctor, in the middle of this. But I'll try to give you as much as I can to help you out along the way. So we're going to talk about some of the signs and symptoms. A lot of people kind of are familiar with this, but ADD signs are having a short attention span, easily distracted. We're kind of joking this morning. I was just trying to get my brain working, and I think one of the patients was laughing, going like, "Do you have ADD?" I was like, "No, I'm just trying to get going for the morning." Making careless mistakes, is something. This is kind of where you see some of the adult ADD, and even some of the patients that right before they start getting dementia. And I don't want to open up that can of worms because that could be another topic altogether. But when you start getting some of your dementias, they'll actually look like ADD before that starts to take place. So, I mean, you can see this careless mistakes kind of in kids, adults, and even in the seniors. Appearing forgetful or losing things, being unable to stick to a task that are tedious or time consuming. Sometimes you'll see where they kind of jump from topic to topic to topic. They really don't tie up the loose ends. So when you kind of look at somebody like, oh my gosh, you have so many irons in the fire and so many things that you're doing that you really haven't like tied up any loose ends. So it just looks like you're like all over the place. Appearing to be unable to listen or carry out instructions, constantly changing activity or task, and then having difficulty with organizing tasks or even thoughts. So they're just kind of all over the place. I also wanted to list on here your ADHD symptoms, which you got the attention deficit disorder, and then you have attention deficit hyperactive. So with this hyperactive piece, you'll see people that just struggle to sit still. They fidget, they move, they we all kind of have this, we do some of this, where you can bite on things, play with things, click pens, so you see that fidgeting, constantly moving. So those could be some of your hyperactivity types of disorders. You see people that are unable to concentrate on tasks, excessive physical movement, excessive talking. They're impulsive, so sometimes they can't like wait their turn, so they're interjecting constantly because their brains are just going and going and going and going. So as their brain goes, they're like, well, what about this? What about this? Well, I think this. And you're like, oh my gosh, settle down. Like, wait your turn. So you definitely see this a lot more with kids who are just interrupting all the time and just kind of impulsive. And then you see this little or no sense of danger. Sometimes like in sports is great, and you're like, hey, that kid just takes off and they don't care and they'll just like, bulldoze people and take the ball away. And, you're like, hey, that's really great. And that's sometimes why those kids do really well at sports, but they just have this like sense of, or little or no sense of danger. So they're just like full speed ahead. They just interrupt, and there's good and bads to this. And if you kind of listened to me on the radio yesterday, we were talking about this. It's interesting that when you kind of get into the adult phase, that some of these traits can be amazing when it comes to adults. They're great at hyper focusing on some of your tasks. Some of your like VP and CEOs and some of these smart people, they tend to have like ADD. I've even had some patients like, can you make me better? But I don't want to affect my job because that's how I got this job and that's why I'm so good at it. And some of your sports people, they're just all over the place, but they're just they go. It's crazy. So it's really interesting when in the kid world in the school, it's very disruptive, very impulsive. It's a struggle for teachers, a struggle for siblings and parents and whatnot. But some of these become skills when you get into the adult phase, which is just interesting to think about. But again, that could be another topic that we can talk about forever as well. So I wanted to kind of talk about the ADD, ADHD symptoms because these are some of the things that I think are struggles that parents will bring their kids in for, teachers struggle with, grandparents struggle with, their friends and family struggle with. But if you're an adult, these are things that sometimes are struggle in marriages. So this is some of the things that we've seen out there where people are like, hey, I got a spouse that just can't concentrate. They don't finish tasks. They're all over the place. It makes it really hard, for relationships. So I just wanted to start off with this, and then let's go into the brain side of things. So kind of a couple different concepts. One of them I'm going to give you is more of this like right brain, left brain concept and idea. And I think it makes things a little bit simpler. And then I'll talk about more specific areas of the brain that you can look at and focus on. The first one I want to go into definitely is this right brain, left brain concept. And one of the things that you see out there is like functional disconnect syndromes, right brain, left brain connect issues. There's some really cool research that's going on in some of your universities outside the US that I've heard and read some of their stuff, and it's fascinating. So they're looking at like, how's the right brain and the left brain communicating? Now, when you're born, the right brain is actually the first thing to develop. So you have kind of, if you have a starting point, you have your right brain that says, okay, I'm going to kick on first. And then about the age of 3, the left brain then starts to kick on. Okay, so that, by the time 3, 4, 5 rolls around, you're kind of even, so to speak, just to make things really simple. Now, one of the thoughts when you get into your ADD, ADHD is that the right brain is developing, but at the same time, the left brain is kind of doing some development as well, so that by the time age 3 rolls around, the left brain is developing even further. So they start talking about this left brain, right brain discrepancy. Okay, and that's kind of, it's interesting when you start looking at like your ADD and autism spectrum disorders and some of these things that are on the spectrum that people talk about. You're looking to say, what is that right brain doing compared to the left? And there's definitely some different conditions that are more right-brained, versus some conditions that are left-brained, meaning that your right brain may not be as strong, and as a result, you see some strengths of the left brain and deficiencies of the right. And so we talk more often about this overactive left brain. And so that's kind of what you're going to see me talking about when it comes to ADD, ADHD, is this overactivation of the left or underactivation of the right. Okay, so we'll say it one more time. So with ADD, ADHD, we tend to see more of an overactivation of the left brain and an underactivation of the right brain. Okay, so in doing so, you see different symptoms, and that's what I'm going to talk about right now. Now, we'll start off with the left brain. So the left brain, a really great, easy analogy is the gas pedal. Okay, so I was actually talking with a parent this morning. We're kind of talking about this, and it kind of fits. This simple analogy is that your left brain is the gas pedal and that right brain is the brake. So it's almost like if somebody has this overactive left brain, it's like somebody's just hitting the gas pedal and they're going and going and going and going, and just nothing seems to stop. Their brain will perseverate, meaning it can loop over and over again. So sometimes you hear kids, they'll sing a song and they can't get the song stuck, they can't get the song out of their head. So they're stuck on a jingle, they're stuck on something that you said, they're perseverating on, I need to finish that task, I gotta get this done. And they can only like focus on that one thing. They can't really see the big picture because they get like locked in to the details from this left brain just like hitting the gas pedal, if that makes sense. And so when we look at right brain, left brain, we're going to talk about like some of these kids have too much of the gas and not enough brake. So they're impulsive, they're interruptive, they don't know when to stop, they're fidgety, they're moving, they're hyperactive, they're kind of in that the old movie called was it Up in the Air or Up, and the dog was like squirrel. That's kind of what these kids do. It's like they see something shiny and it's like, oh, what's that? What's that noise? What's that shadow? What's that movement? What are they doing? What are they doing? And their brain just won't stop because you don't have enough of that brake system. So with the left brain, what I wanted to kind of point out is you also see some of these things with kids where they can be really amazingly detailed. Some of the kids that have ADD are sometimes just brilliant. They're so stinking smart where they can put things together and take things apart and never read the instructions. You look at, like your Albert Einsteins and some of these people that they say over the years are some of the smartest people in our history, and they all had like ADD. These kids are super, super smart. So they really have the details. They understand a lot of times science, math. You see some of these kids are like gamers, programmers, coding people, IBMers, or inventors. They invent stuff. It's just really, that's why I say there's some strengths to this, but also there comes some of the weakness, and it's kind of that saying, some of your greatest strengths are also your greatest weaknesses. So you can see people that overanalyze things. They can't see the big picture. They tend to kind of withdraw from social networks and social groups, where they kind of be that loner that people talk about. They're like gaming all the time with their headphones on. They don't really interact with people very well. They're just super smart, but they just don't interact. Sometimes they're a little bit awkward, but they're super brilliant. So that's kind of these left brain kind of types of scenarios that you see with kids. And sometimes you can get into like the savants that are just brilliant, brilliant kids that just don't know how to interact and they can't see the big picture. So they just get hyper focused in the details. Now, the right brain, we're going to talk about the right brain kind of being like the brake system. So we got to have an ability to say like, hey, don't interrupt. Hey, stop what you're doing for a second and say hi to your grandparents. Stop for a second and pay attention to what the teacher is doing. Don't get distracted by that. Stay focused. And that's what you kind of want this right brain to tell you, is give you a little bit of that brake system to say, hey, slow down a little bit, pay attention, focus on what you're doing, finish that task, and move on to the next task. And so a lot of these kids kind of struggle with that. The right brain is also, part of that creativity aspect, reading, arts. It's also involved in engaging, looking at big picture concepts. So sometimes you see like visionaries. You have in a corporate world, you have those visionaries. They're like, we're going to go that way. We're going to conquer the world, and we're going to do this. We're going to do that. And they need to have a very detailed person to say, well, how are we going to do it? They're like, I don't know. We're just going to go that way. And that's kind of the right brain person. The left brain says, all right, so we're going to take this step and then this step, and we're going to pull this group together and this group together. And we're going to do this and do that. And that's how the brain kind of works together. So when you have somebody that is balanced, which we all have our strengths and weaknesses, that's what you kind of hope is, hey, we're going to go that way, and this is how we're going to do it. Sometimes I laugh in my house. I'm very left brain dominant, and my wife is very right brain dominant. So that's kind of our strengths and weaknesses. So even if you look at my PowerPoint, it's all like bulleted and detailed and dot, 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 dot. My wife is very more a big picture person, so she runs a nonprofit that she started, and she has all these great ideas and visions on where life should go, what they should do, and who we're serving. And she has a lot of empathy, for kids with special needs and justice. And it's really interesting. And I'm like, wow, how are you going to get there? Like, what are you going to do? How are you going to get this and this and this and this and this done? And it's just kind of interesting when you kind of watch our kind of right brain, left brain dominance. They're definitely different. Another piece I kind of laugh at is, when loading the dishes, I'm like, well, the dishes all go this way and the water goes this way and it cleans the plates this way. And my wife like, well, throw everything in there. And she's like, it all gets cleaned somehow. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So you see this, but then you just take it to the extremes. So some of these kids with autism and ADD, they really rely heavily towards that left brain, and they can't see the big picture. And so parents get frustrated, like, I don't understand why you did that. Don't you understand that this can happen? And they just can't see that. They're hyper focused on the details. And so that's one of the ways that we can start incorporating therapy, is like, how do we build this right brain? How do we engage it so that we can have a better balance between the two? And so I tell you this from a very generalized, almost protocol based type of system, in which you can look at right brain, left brain, and then do some things to try to balance it out, to try to give that strength to that right cortex overall. And a great book for this is actually Dr. Melillo, spelled Mellilo, but he wrote Disconnected Kids. And it was a brilliant book because it kind of helped the parent to understand, here's the right brain and here's the left brain, and even has some questionnaires in there and things that you guys can help figure out, is my kid one way or the other? And then he gives like all these great therapies. So there's right brain therapies, left brain therapies. And I tell you that because there's a lot of things that you guys can do as parents, before we come into play. Or sometimes parents go, you know what, I just need somebody to take care of my kid or my family member. But it's a great book called Disconnected Kids. So if you're not familiar with it, and we even use it as a training tool in my office for staff. We're like, here's a bunch of left brain therapies and right brain therapies, and here's some ideas that we can incorporate into getting people and kids better. We even use these kind of things when we look at like traumatic brain injuries and brain rehab, because we do a ton of that in our office. So that's your right brain, left brain. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create balance. So your brain needs to say, okay, stop, and then go. And this is a time to go, and this is a time to stop. This is the time to not be impulsive, and this is a time to really go after and get what you need. And so that's kind of your right brain, left brain connection that you're always trying to keep balanced. Like I said, we all have strengths and weaknesses, and that's, I think, what makes the world go round. Sometimes I'll joke around, if you're familiar with the Denver metro area, sometimes I'll laugh and say people from Boulder tend to be more right brain, and people from Colorado Springs tend to be more left brain. So you kind of joke around saying, like, you see a lot of the kind of analytical aspects, and then Boulder is much more creative, and then Denver is kind of a mix of the two. So that's kind of the joke that you kind of have around Denver. But we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and so there's nothing wrong with that. But it can get to a point where it becomes debilitating or distracting, and I think that's where that line becomes, I guess, where we kind of cross over and evaluate it. So I want to talk about some other areas of the brain, and these are kind of some common areas here. One is the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is like mom and dad. What people don't know is that the frontal lobe in women and females tends to fully develop around like 17, 18, 19, right around there. In boys, men, maybe still boys at some point, we tend to develop our frontal lobes around like the age of 25. So it's kind of interesting that when you look at how the difference between females and males, I mean, females definitely have a better system of saying, like, that's not a right, that's not appropriate, you really shouldn't do that, you should study, you should like get a job, do some of these things. And then you have some of these guys that are like, woohoo, car surfing, go get them, and you're like, wait a minute, shouldn't you be studying? You're like, I'll do that tomorrow, woohoo, let's go party. So that's kind of your frontal lobe is mom and dad. Because if your mom and dad was around, they would say, you know what, you probably shouldn't car surf. That's not very safe. You probably shouldn't ride your bike, off of the roof into the pool. That's not safe. And it's funny. One of the shows I love watching just for guilty pleasure is called Ridiculousness. And sometimes my wife and I will laugh and watch these shows. And I'm like, most of these are boys doing dumb things. You don't see very many women doing these things. And so it kind of makes me laugh going, that's probably that frontal lobe that's not doing a good job of saying, like, settle down, don't do dumb things, be mature, get a job, go to school. But that frontal lobe plays a role in kids, because when you're impulsive, when you're not finishing tasks, when you can't concentrate, aspects of memory, the ability to multitask, I think I said that, these are mostly frontal lobe mechanisms. And so that you see a lot of times those frontal lobe mechanisms really kind of come into play when we're looking at ADD, ADHD. Primitive reflexes is another one. If you're not familiar with primitive reflexes, these are reflexes that stick around, or they shouldn't stick around, actually. They're there when you're born, and then they should go away at certain times, like 2 months, 3 months, 9 months, 2 years, things like that. So when you're evaluating, like a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old, and they still have these reflexes, you shouldn't have those anymore. And as your brain develops and your frontal lobe develops, those primitive reflexes are actually suppressed. Sometimes you can actually see them come back with brain injuries. But overall, those primitive reflexes should be suppressed. And if you don't have proper brain development, or if that frontal lobe's not quite developing the way it should, you see the persistence of these primitive reflexes. So we'll check on those. There's actually exercises that you can do for those, which are basically kind of like frontal lobe exercises. And we can start working on coordinating and cross motor activation. Now, I put the midbrain in here, and a lot of people don't know quite what that is, but it's the middle part of your brain that deals with your fight or flight, some of your sleep, also some of your emotionality too. What I find a lot of times with kids that have like hyperactivity disorder, they tend to be those kids that are like squirrel, from that movie where it's like squirrel, and they talk to you, and then they see something like, oh, what was that? And it's kind of that reptilian part of the brain that people talk about, where it's like, what's that? What's going on? Is that danger? Is that not danger? And so they're constantly trying to figure that out, and your brain just won't calm down because it's like, what's that? What's that? And it'll loop it. Like, am I going to get hurt? What are they doing? What are they doing? What are they doing? I got to do this. I can't focus anymore because what are they doing? What are they doing? And their brain gets really fast. Okay. And so the rest of your brain, especially that frontal lobe, should have some modulation into that. So to kind of make things simple, it's like that reptilian brain, we needed that to settle down and not be so like hyper aware of what's going on in our environment. It's kind of like watching a bird, when their heads are just like, going back and forth and like, what's that? What's that? What's going on? What are you doing? And you just see that reptilian brain kind of come through. The visual system is another area to look into, because what you find is if some kids are struggling with this visual system, it's really easy to get distracted. So they might be reading, and then all of a sudden their eyes jump off the words or the line, and then they get distracted and their brain's like, hey, what's going on over there? Or they're trying to pay attention to you, and all of a sudden their eyes shift off the target, and then it gets very distracting. So we will look at the visual system to see if that's maybe a cause or a reason why they have some attention deficit disorders. Is because of that visual piece. They can't stay on target. Their eyes are constantly shifting or moving or breaking their focus. And then the last part you look at is the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is your balance and your gross motor coordination. Now, it's interesting, a lot of kids, when you kind of look at that ADD population, a lot of them don't have great gross motor. And you can ask them like, hey, do you like playing sports? And they're like, no, I'm just clumsy. I fall and I trip and I'm just not good at sports. So they don't really go into that sports arena. So that's when we start looking at like frontal lobe and coordination and cerebellum and gross motor coordination and saying, hey, these areas of the brain need to develop. And even what you find in a developmental standpoint is a lot of times you're born with your cerebellum and vestibular and brainstem, and then these other parts of the brain start to kind of layer, and they get stronger and stronger and stronger as you get older. So you're born with the areas of your brain that keep you alive, and then as you get older, now you can walk and talk, and then you can drive, and then you can have a relationship, and then you can have a job. But you have to have these developmental pieces take place. So even sometimes when you're getting into rehab, you'll even see that some centers and places, they actually will start in some of those like primitive areas, and then they'll build on top of that to help strengthen those areas of the brain in kind of a developmental fashion. So I just wanted to kind of mention some of these other areas because there's a lot of pieces to think about, and you can see why this can easily be like a one-day seminar just on ADD alone. So kind of in the examination process, what I think is good is when you're looking for a practitioner, you want to find somebody who has this whole like detailed evaluation. You want somebody that knows how to look at primitive reflexes, that knows how to look at the visual system, knows how to map out the eyes. So on here, what you'll see is we have things like computerized balance testing, neurological exam, physical exam. You want to look at tone. I mean, hypotonia can also be seen in some of these like imbalances in development of the brain. I put on here some lab testing. Sometimes when you get into ADD, maybe the brain is working well, but their fuel source isn't good. Sometimes we see where kids are being accused of having ADD, but they're having hypoglycemic, which is low blood sugar. Their blood sugar is dropping, so they're struggling to pay attention in school. As adults, we know this. I mean, you hear your friends and coworkers all the time, like, I need to eat something. I just can't focus anymore. But if a kid is the same thing, a kid doesn't know to say, hey, I need to eat, I can't focus. It's, hey, lunch is in another hour and a half, you need to pay attention. And so there's been times where I'm like, hey, their brain looks great, but they just don't have good fuel. Can we like improve what they eat? Can we actually get them a mid-morning snack? And all of a sudden now the kid has fuel and they can focus in school. So it's interesting to me that sometimes what we think as an adult, we think a certain way, but then when it comes to our kid, we don't think the same way. We just go, oh, they must have ADD. I'm like, maybe they need to eat something. Maybe their vision is blurred because they haven't eaten in 4 hours and they've been on the playground. They're a kid that's burning through fuel so fast because they're growing. Maybe they need some more calories. Maybe they need some more fuel. So we'll look at lab testing and look at glucose and some other markers that might be impacting their brain function. And then you want to do a detailed history where we can look at things like birthing processes. Do they have an illness like rotavirus or a respiratory, a respiratory virus of some sort that maybe triggered, some of these ADD type of symptoms? There's a lot when you get into ADD. It's not just clearly 100% brain, but they've looked at some of your immune system and autoimmune conditions. They've looked at inflammatory mechanisms. They looked at hormones. Even hormones play a role. Sometimes kids are great, and then as soon as they hit that teenage phase and hormones kick in, bam, here came all the ADD symptoms again. So there's a lot of things that play a role. It's not just as simple as a protocol, and they'll be great. So it's kind of an example of VNG testing where we look at the eyes and we graph it out and we say, okay, can they focus? There's even some cool graphs in which you can have a kid like read a line. We used to have this software, Terry Trinka has it, but you can have a kid actually read and you can see where they're breaking their target and in which direction and things like that. And it's kind of cool. It gives you a little bit more insight on how to do some rehabilitation. We'll look at vestibular system. So your vestibular, your eyes and your neck, they all kind of play a role. So sometimes you can have this abnormal vestibular mechanism that's messing up your eyes and not allowing you to focus, and that can cause some distractibility within your own system. And then we do a full neuro exam. So we just look at a lot of pieces. A lot of times out there in the ADD world, you hear like sensory processing disorder, and I agree with that, but I don't think that's the end all to be all. I think sensory processing is kind of a consequence of things not matching up. And so sometimes you'll hear like sensory mismatch where they don't know where they're at in space. They don't have that awareness to fully integrate their world. So you see a lot of sensory processing, but you also see a lot of motor issues, primitive reflexes that are still persistent. I mean, you see that right brain, left brain discrepancy. So there's a lot of things that you need to look at when you're evaluating somebody with ADD. So I list on here some of your laboratory testing, and I listed a couple things on here that's good if you're ever talking to a doctor. An iron panel, when you're anemic, it's really hard to function. Just ask any adult who's ever had anemia. Sometimes kids are anemic too, and simply giving a kid iron and getting their iron levels back up can make all the difference in the world. Glucose, having blood sugar, having a good amount of blood sugar to make your brain function is actually important. That's your main fuel source. A CBC helps to look at your red blood cells and your white blood cells and any kind of immune issue. And you do see that sometimes kids, could have a virus that they're fighting off. Sometimes you see kids that have things like Epstein-Barr virus or mono, and that makes it really hard to focus and decreases their energy. So you want to kind of get a glimpse of what's going on the inside that could be disrupting their fuel source or disrupting their metabolism, even causing a lot of inflammation. That makes it really hard. Again, as an adult, and you hear this all the time where an adult will go to lunch, they'll have like a burger and a fries and a Coke, right? Which is not super healthy. And then they try to go back to work and they're like, geez, I can't function. I have brain fog. I can't seem to get my work done today. You're like, why is that? And they're like, I don't know. I shouldn't have had that burger, right? But then you'll have a kid that's at school, they'll have a burger and juice and fries and sugar. And then after lunch, like, oh, I don't know why my kid that can't concentrate. I'm like, well, they probably have brain fog and their blood sugar is a mess, just like you as an adult can experience that. So again, it's interesting as an adult, we understand these things, but with kids, it's like, oh, I don't know, they have ADD after lunch. I was like, well, maybe they should eat something different for lunch that's healthier, not just sugar and fried food and, candy. So these are some of the things that you got to look at with adults and kids. So it kind of leads us into diet and food. Here's some of the things that we see are the most common to look at is, wheat and dairy. Wheat and dairy for a lot of people can be inflammatory. There's just talks on how it's processed, some of the chemicals that are in there. But those are some of the things that literally I've talked to parents and said, hey, I would, look at wheat and dairy. And then the parents will come back to me months later and they go, it's really interesting. My kid's been doing better since we took him off of wheat and dairy. And like, wow, well, I just talked myself out of a job, so that's good. But it's important. These are simple things that you can try as an adult. Another one is red and blue dyes. There's been a lot of talk about neurotoxicity and how that impacts the brain. And red and blue dyes tend to be the worst. A lot of dyes are not good for you, but the red and blue ones tend to be the worst. We've seen this in adults. We've seen this in kids. You can read about it. But if you look at ketchup and candy bars and popsicles and lollipops and bubble gum, Kool-Aid, all these different things have red and blue dyes, and they're just not good for you at all. And some of these dyes, they actually stick and they bind to like protein tissue. If you want a case of that, just have somebody suck on a blue lollipop and then stick out their tongue. The tongue is blue because the blue dye sticks to the protein. So there's, when you kind of think about it, you're like, that can't be good. And then we look at other food allergens. We look at sugar, and we wonder many times, why is our kid not able to concentrate? And it's like, well, they just had a soda pop, they just had candy, they just had mac and cheese and chicken nuggets, which is almost a staple of most kids. So we usually ask the parents, like, hey, can you look at some of these food allergens for us? So what to do? So one of the things that you guys can do, and I kind of wanted to, a list that I'll give you here in a second, but obviously you can do some brain rehabilitation. There's things that, if you read the Disconnected Kids book, there's a lot of things you can incorporate and try. I think Dr. Malillo has done a phenomenal job, and if you're getting stuck with that, then that's when you can, find people like me and say, hey, can you help me more? Everybody's a little bit different. You might just need a little bit more help on that. So neurological areas that we can support is you look at primitive reflexes, you look at eye movements and vision therapy. We look at some of these like primitive areas like the brainstem, the midbrain, and then we start working on some of these more developed areas like the frontal lobe and the cerebellum. So these are some of the areas of neurological support that you look at. And then we talked about that right brain, left brain. So a lot of times with kids, we can do things that are more towards that right brain, like doing complex movements on the left side of the body, maybe working on sensory on the left side of the body, having them do certain activities where they have to use their left arm, left leg, kicking a ball, throwing a ball, doing some different things where it has to activate that right part of the brain. Mental health, I threw this in here. I was kind of thinking about it, and I'm like, I'm gonna throw this in here because I think this is something that does get overlooked. Jake Meyer is our social work and counselor in the office and deals a lot with this kind of stuff. But if you look in the research, some of these stressors can really lead to anxiety and some of your ADD as well. And they've talked about like divorces and neglect and verbal abuse, emotional abuse, kids who are orphaned. And it's really fascinating, the information that's out there. So this is an area that you can't deny, and we always look into and say, is that something we need to talk about more or look into more? Just look at the stress that parents can be under. Life is super hard, and what impact does that have on the kids? So we always look at the mental health side of things as well, because it can be a bigger deal than I think we recognize. So that's one of the things that we try to do in the office. Dietary changes. Some of the things you guys can do simply with yourselves and kids is take out wheat, take out dairy, and then after that, stabilize blood sugar, get the healthy fats. I know kids don't necessarily like all the healthy foods out there, but there are things that you can be creative with. Sometimes you can make like little protein balls with, like coconut oil and cacao or chocolate. And you can make some of these things where kids are like, oh, I love that. That's awesome. There's amazing gluten-free options out there for kids anymore. The world has changed since I've been in practice, when it was like cardboard bread that was so nasty that you had to cut it in half and toast it and try to make something out of it. Now there's like awesome breads and awesome foods and awesome baked goods. And there's almost hardly an excuse anymore. I think there's a lot of great options. Don't skip meals. I think with kids, it's so easy to say, hey, I'm going to eat my gluten-filled sugary food with milk, and that's how we're going to start the day. And if you think about it, like, that may not be the best way to start the day. What about some protein or some eggs or some chicken sausage, turkey bacon, regular bacon? That would probably be much better than, a grain with sugar, soaked in sugar and then soaked in milk. And that's all we're going to have. And then go, well, I don't know why my kid's not paying attention to school. It's like, well, you don't see any adults really doing that much anymore. Adults make sure they have like protein or bacon or something, but I would struggle if I just had cereal in the morning with sugar all over it. So what about kids? And then don't skip meals. You definitely see kids who are skipping meals and then going off to school. And then reduce inflammation, and that's what you can kind of do through diet. So just eating healthy, trying to get some more greens in there. Or there's some really cool green drinks that actually taste good that are like mint that kids can utilize. You just have to be creative, which I think is sometimes hard from a parental standpoint because life is crazy, and all of a sudden you have to like shift gears and say, okay, how do I change our family dynamics or our routine? That's why I think the summer is a good time to figure that out because once school starts, everybody's back into routines and it's really hard. So if you can figure those out during the summer, I think it makes life easier. When I say this, being a parent and having two kids and even having a kid with special needs, I mean it's not easy. Life doesn't really stop, but I think if you can make the time for it, it actually gets easier and easier and easier. Just it does take a lot of work, but I think it's worth it in the long run for yourself and the kids and other kids and teachers and grandparents and I think life gets harder. So if you can figure it out now, it makes life easier. I threw in a couple supplements in here. Essential fatty acids, fish oils can actually be great for kids. Magnesium can be good. You'll see things like magnesium threonate, magnesium malate. Sometimes those are really good for the brain. B12. Some of the things that we use in the office that we try is like dopamine support and GABA support. So dopamine is really good for the frontal lobe, where GABA can calm down some of those midbrain reptilian areas. So oftentimes we'll actually use some of these like dopamine and GABA types of support to see if we can get the brain to settle down or to modulate a little bit better. So you can. It's never too late, and I think some parents think that it is, and they're like, man, I just give up. It's never too late, and if you ever want, we do free 30-minute consultations. I'll be happy to talk with you and give you my thoughts, and probably talk too much. And I think the goal is to try to help you guys, and if we can be there to be a part of your team or part of your PT OT speech team, we're more than happy to do so. I think it takes a village a lot of times with kids. And I think when you collaborate with the PT and the OT and the counselor and the teacher and the grandparent and who's ever involved in the kid's care, that's when you win. I think these are tough times, and I think parents get overwhelmed easily. So I think you have to have a village and a team to make this work. I threw in a couple, resources. These are things that we're kind of involved in. I know this is on the brain injury side, but if you guys love brain stuff, this is who we're collaborating with right now. We're doing a lot of stuff with Amy Zelmer and her brain injury concussion group. She started a brain health magazine, which is pretty awesome. We got empowered through a TBI. So we're doing some stuff with Joanne Phillips. Integrated Brain Center is us, so we're even trying to get a team of people together. And that's why in the office, we got Jake Myers, who you'll hear on counseling and mental health. We have Terry Trinka, who does our stuff with, eyes and vision. He's an optometrist. And then, Perry Maynard's the other doctor in the office. And, stay tuned, but we're going to have some people doing some different like IV therapies in here, craniosacral work. So it's like we're trying to get a team because it does take a village to help a lot of these people. So, this is where you kind of stay in touch with us if you like this kind of stuff and what we're putting out there. You can also listen to us on the radio. So every week we're rotating just like we are with the webinars. So next week, Jacob will be, on the radio show Mondays from 12:30 to 1. So definitely listen. You can even call in and text questions and we can answer those on the show. So we're always doing stuff for you guys on Mondays and Tuesdays with our blogs and articles and our Facebook post. So reach us on Facebook as well. Telehealth is available. So if you need that, if you're out of state, out of country, or just need to not come in the office for whatever reason, telehealth is available. So we can schedule those things. And last but not least, you can reach us at Integrated Health Systems and Brain Centers. So we have a Facebook page, so you can go to both and keep up with us. We're on Twitter, Instagram, all those things, and maybe TikTok. Who knows? That's big these days. It's so funny. Call for a free 30-minute consultation. You can reach us. We're always happy to do so. So happy Tuesday. I hope you got a lot out of this. I feel like I'm talking super fast, but it's a lot of information to try to cram in. So maybe it'd be good to do another one of these and focus on something. So if you have any requests, you can always, let us know, shoot an email to info@Integrated Health Systems or integratedhealthdenver.com. And that's about it. Hope you guys have an awesome week and look forward to seeing you soon on another webinar. Take care.